Hello, everybody. Hi. It's been such a pleasure to meet and speak with so many of you. My name is Alexander Hurezeanu. I am from Canada, the great frozen north. I'm very pleased to be back in Europe for the first time since before COVID. Actually, that's a lie. I was in Bremen 2 weeks ago, and then I flew back to Canada, and now I'm back here in Vienna. So my brain is okay. I'm managing. A little bit about myself. I am a game studies scholar from Toronto Metropolitan University, defending my dissertation hopefully next year, fingers crossed. But I'm also a faculty member at a technical college in Toronto, George Brown College, as we call kind of Ubisoft Junior College, because all of our students get funneled straight to Ubisoft, as it is in Canada. But and kind of, again, flipping from what Simon was talking about, I am primarily, my background is applied linguistics and cultural studies, and actually my research is not so much in apocalyptic gaming or literature. It's actually mostly Japanese games and Japanese game studies, so I do a lot of transcultural work, translation work in that regards, but my master's was totally focused in apocalyptic literary theory, so I thought, hey, this is perfect. This is great. I'm going to do something about this. So welcome. Hope After the Bombs, exploring transcultural imaginaries through classic Fallout mods from the former Eastern Bloc. Here we go. The concept of apocalypse is a difficult and often misconstrued one. For future studies scholar Walter Warren Wagar, the origins of an eschatological imagining of apocalypse lies in the religious historical tradition of prophetic vision and the desire for prophecy, suggesting that apocalypse should be just as much about revelation as it should be about visions of a devastated future. As the study of utopia is often associated with visions, dreams, or desires of a better time and place, the study of modern eschatology similarly favors visions that foretell a better tomorrow rather than doom and damn the future. Indeed, scholars have long asserted that utopia and apocalypse are concepts that are actually carefully integrated into one another. Even in some examples of apocalyptic fiction, where all inhabitants are doomed to perish, terminal utopias of love and tenderness make their appearance. Thus, the confrontation of death would generate an intimacy of spirit amongst the last men and women that would otherwise have never emerged, an intimacy of wholeness and goodness unattainable in the everyday present. To suggest, as sociologist Krishan Kumar has, that utopian fiction has been dead for many decades, and that apocalyptic fiction is completely unhopeful of life and transformative power would seem to be a little presumptuous, especially given the enduring power and popularity of apocalyptic narratives and experiences in video games. So if you ever want to be really depressed, I suggest reading Kumar's text on utopia, and if you actually want to be kind of hopeful, Wagar's text on apocalypse is really, really wonderful stuff on Cold War literature. To what extent, then, are games about the apocalypse useful to the concept of utopia, then? How can games about the apocalypse encourage unique cultural contexts through which we may envision novel utopian forms? This paper presentation explores the classic post-nuclear role-playing games, Fallout 1 and 2, specifically as unique transcultural experiences from the perspectives of players, designers, and modders from the former Eastern Bloc. Utilizing Mikhail Epstein's and Epstein Berry's transcultural interference framework, I argue that Interplay's original Fallout games emphasizes an open system of symbolic alternatives to existing cultures and their established sign systems, as demonstrated by classic Fallout mods such as Fallout Nevada, Fallout Sonora, and Fallout Resurrection. Each of these mods, produced by developers from the former Eastern Bloc, are exemplary transcultural negotiations that seek to transcend Fallout's predominantly apocalyptic American cultural forms in order to produce utopic transcultural imaginaries. So this brings us to the larger cultural discussion surrounding Fallout 1 and 2 and a more personal observation about their reception in Eastern European contexts. As a Romanian Canadian, I was awestruck when I visited my cousins in Bucharest in 1999 and they showed me their Fallout save files on their family computers. Having played and enjoyed the games myself at home in Canada, I listened to them as they gleefully proclaimed that these were the coolest games they ever played. Fallout 1 and 2 were enormous hits in Eastern Europe and are widely considered cult classics for many contemporary Slavic, East European, and Eurasian game developers. So you can see here, this is Piatra Rahova. Coincidentally, the church there in the background is the church where my parents got married. Just a sheer coincidence. My mom pointed that out to me. I was like, oh, cool. And this is like 1998, 1999, where you could go and get a whole bunch of bootleg stuff. For anybody who comes from that sort of region, this might seem a little bit nostalgic, so good fun stuff there. From the acclaimed Stalker series, developed and produced in Ukraine, to the more obscure but well-regarded Atom RPG, developed multinationally in Poland, Latvia, and Cyprus, many gamers from the former Eastern Bloc were undeniably influenced to enter game development due to the extraordinary influence of Interplay's classic Fallout games. As Jaroslav Svelch outlines in his essential text, Gaming the Iron Curtain, Czechoslovakia and indeed many Soviet states were not in political or economic positions to import video game consoles from abroad. But instead, we were eagerly making our national microcomputers part of emerging technoculture. And as user bases grew, so too did existing support networks and extensive collections of pirated software. So this is actually ITC Brashov, a microcomputer from Romania that was actually refurbished back in 2016. This is kind of becoming a thing, in Romania at least, where they're taking these old sort of Soviet-era microcomputers and rebuilding it. I don't know, this weird kind of retro Soviet nostalgia. In my recent discussions with Nikolai Kazmirko-Kirillov, a Russian YouTuber who goes by the name Warlocracy and covers role-playing games from Eastern Europe, he and I reminisced over the nature of computer gaming during the murky post-Soviet revolutionary period from 1989 to 1992 and the post-revolutionary years that followed. During this time, gaming enthusiasts mostly purchased pirated software directly from specialist stores that often provided their own homebrewed translations of varying quality of games from the West. According to Nikolai, what made Fallout so particularly influential were two specific factors. Firstly, it was cheap. Games were priced based on the amount of CD-ROMs in the package, and the classic Fallouts were single CD games. Secondly, the craftsmanship. The Fallouts are simply well made. The games still, I argue, look good if you ignore the dated UI, but I suspect that there must have been deeper reasons for Fallout's popularity, especially when one considers that the highly influential RPG, Baldur's Gate, was released around the same time, but seemingly had far less of a cultural impact on Eastern European gamers, with a little asterisk being Poland as the exception. But as Nikolai pointed out to me, quote, Eastern Slav audiences were RPGs naive. We didn't have much of an RPG's culture back then, and early Dungeons & Dragons games can be obtuse with concepts like THAC0 and a huge list of spells you need to learn to achieve systems competence. There are no spells in Fallout. Instead of casting a spell, you shoot them in the leg, end quote. In other words, Fallout's gritty, realistic, post-apocalyptic aesthetic made the series far more approachable and attributable to Eastern European audiences than the elves and dwarves featured in fantasy role-playing games. The cultural impact that Fallout 1 and 2 had on Eastern European gamers was indelible, as the aesthetics and mechanics combined with the unique window that these games provided into American culture was a winning recipe for success. I would like to further posit that part of Fallout's fame and prominence was the fact that its post-apocalyptic setting was uncannily familiar to those who lived through the chaos and upheaval that followed the collapse of the Soviet Union. For many Eastern Bloc countries in the 1990s and early 2000s, the democratic revolutions resulted in uneasy transitions that led to immense social and political upheavals, with significant increases in crime and corruption alongside drastic social and cultural changes. The collapse of the Soviet Union destabilized economic systems and trade relations across Eastern Europe and utterly eroded the basic infrastructure of many countries in the Eastern Bloc. Indeed, one only needs to look at certain neighborhoods and urban settlements from this particular time period in post-socialist countries and compare them to the visual style of the cities and settlements in Fallout 1 and 2, in order to begin to understand what I think made these particular games so immediately identifiable and relatable. Even Fallout 1 and 2's dark humor and its pessimistic treatment of the vaults as utopic safe havens can be comparatively understood as a reflection of the widespread post-socialist revolutionary tensions. Thus, I believe the so-called Eastern European apocalyptic aesthetic has far less to do with a fetishization of apocalyptic pessimism and nuclear war for global markets, and much more to do with the deep-seated angst and apprehension that many Eastern Europeans who lived through both the socialist and post-socialist revolutionary periods still feel to this day. Co-written, then, by Russian cultural theorist Mikhail Epstein and American literary scholar Epstein Berry, Transcultural Experiments, Russian and American Models of Creative Communication, this book seeks to critique post-Cold War Eastern and Western cultural dichotomies by dislodging our visions of culture as unitary and monolithic. Influenced by Donna Haraway's notions of post-human collectivity, Berry and Epstein point to the transcultural practices as capable of offering strategies for the invention of positive alternatives to the legacies of cultural antagonism and domination that have pervaded both Western and Eastern cultures. In this manner, Berry and Epstein construct their text as a series of essays and conversations, or, quote, cultural interferences and estrangements that respond to one another for the explicit purpose of creating new transcultural dialogues that allow us to investigate our own culture in order to distance ourselves from it, and also to investigate a foreign culture in order to inscribe ourselves into it. The broader purpose of these dialogues is to arrive at a new cultural formation that Berry and Epstein term Transcultural Imaginaries. Epstein and Berry's text forms an experimental work through which transculturalism serves as the bridging methodology between seemingly disparate cultures. Furthermore, transcultural interference is an inherently dialogic process that allows us to transcend a given culture through blending and hybridization. As such, I believe that Epstein and Berry's model is well suited to the creative, aesthetic, and dialogic possibilities offered by games and mods. The construction of American post-apocalyptic narratives through the cultural lens of Eastern European modders provides space for unique transcultural imaginaries that engage Eastern and Western notions of apocalypse in a ludic dialectic. In this manner, classic Fallout mods from Eastern Europe are intrinsically transcultural experiences that seek to build new identities in these fuzzy zones and take the next step towards what Epstein and Berry call the ongoing human quest for freedom, in this case, liberation from the prison house of language and the variety of artificial, self-imposed, self-deified cultural identities. Eric Champion famously defines mods or game modifications as artwork, skins, tools, total game transformations, new code, games ported to other platforms by fans. They can also be homage games, which link back to earlier separate but thematically linked game worlds. But why does one bother to design a mod? This question has far deeper implications based around both the history and culture of the game being modded and the modding community formed around the game. But Champion hones in on the fact that mods can extend the life of the original game and inspire the professional game designers and owners of the original franchise. Indeed, many Eastern European developers who worked on Fallout mods have found jobs in the games industry or have gone to form companies of their own. At the same time, several modders continue to work on classic Fallout total conversions well into the 2020s, thereby lengthening the lifespan and impact specifically of Fallout 1 and 2 by over 20 years. Each of the games or mods discussed in my presentation are free to download and featured on Nikolai's Warlocracy YouTube channel, which provides humorous and detailed overviews and reviews of the mods for English-speaking audiences. Alexander Poslyuzhin, a modder from Barno, Siberia, is almost solely responsible for two of the most well-known classic Fallout total conversions, Fallout Nevada, released in 2015, and Fallout Sonora, released in 2020. Both mods were originally released in Russian, and English translations have more recently become available. So let's talk about the mods then. Fallout Nevada takes place 20 years before the events of Fallout 1 and features an amnesic protagonist waking up in the transitional settlement of Vault City, a large urban location featured in Fallout 2. Similar to the classic Fallouts, Nevada features quests and narratives that heavily involve interplay between the various wasteland factions, offering players difficult moral choices that influence the outcome of both the conclusions of these quests and the game's endings. Fascinatingly, however, is the fact that Poslyuzhin has attempted to recreate the state of Nevada as envisioned in the gritty aesthetic of Fallout's post-apocalyptic landscape. Warlocracy points to Poslyuzhin's detailed recreation of real-life locations like the town of Lovelock and the Hawthorne military base, while also marveling over the extent of new sprites, graphics, and talking heads. In one of the most fascinating displays of transcultural interpretation, Fallout Nevada provides players with the ability to travel to Las Vegas and the Hoover Dam. Now, for those of you, which is most of you, versed in the lore and world building of the Fallout series, they will know that these locations are featured prominently in the official mainline game Fallout New Vegas. But rather than paying homage to that title, Nevada attempts to envision Las Vegas as a realistic location based on the actual city located in Nevada. To that end, Poslyuzhin utilizes real-world casinos and landmarks like the Hard Rock Cafe as an in-game location and cultural touchstone to interact with over the completely fictionalized locations in New Vegas. Nevada even utilizes American dollars as in-game currency as opposed to bottle caps, which we all know is Fallout's currency system. In this way, an individual playing Fallout Nevada engages in a unique cultural construction, an American cultural landscape interpreted through a distinctly Russian cultural lens. This particular lens provides the kind of cultural attempts at understanding and misunderstanding that Epstein and Berry's interference model suggest leads to transcultural dialogue. Nevada's narrative culminates at a point in which the player discovers that the pre-war United States government has been hiding deep beneath Vault City and has been utilizing cloning technology to maintain the population of the city as inhabitable bodies for the sake of despotic immortality. The actions of the United States government are presented as clearly immoral, and the president is depicted, as you can see, as an evil, zombie-like figure preserved in a hydropod. The player is given the chance to dispose of the government and grant the clones of Vault City autonomy and freedom, which provides an unprecedented depth to Vault City that was absent from Fallout 2's narrative. In this manner, Vault City is given new context and represented as a city that thrives in the wasteland despite the odds against it. And the reason it thrives into such a prosperous location in Fallout 2 is due to the actions of the player in this little-known fan mod, presenting a utopic vision for a city that is recontextualized from its original presentation. Poshlyuzhin's narrative and design ambitions would find its apex in Fallout Sonora, a total conversion that features even more original sprites, talking heads, music tracks, and quests. This time, however, Poshlyuzhin specifically seeks to explore questions of ethnic and racial tensions within the context of the Sonoran Desert. As such, the game explores the post-apocalyptic landscape of northern Mexico alongside familiar American wasteland and features a large cast of Mexican and Spanish-speaking characters who in fact speak and use the language in-game. This is significant as it is the first and thus far only Fallout game to feature Mexico as an integral part of its narrative and world building. That said, Warlocracy criticizes the game for not doing enough with its Mexican cultural theming, but in turn, the game depicts the Brotherhood of Steel, Fallout's popularly depicted good guy faction known for its militaristic nature and advanced technology, as colonizers. In Sonora, the Brotherhood of Steel used their technological superiority and knowledge of the old world to pursue the agenda of cynical, predatory imperialism, and enact a grand conspiracy that is unfurled throughout the game's narrative. Led by a paladin who is very deliberately named Ulysses S. Grant, the Brotherhood attempts to colonize the Sonoran Desert and put a stop to both the Mexican military and the Desert Rangers. On the one hand, because of the game's focus on player choice and consequence, one can ally with the Brotherhood to see this imperialist quest to its end, only to be confronted by what is essentially the bad ending. And while the player is unable to ally with the Mexican army, the ending in which the player allies with the Desert Rangers permits a more utopian ideal to flourish, in which there is mutual agreement and protection between the factions of the Sonoran Desert. Again, through a transcultural lens, when one plays Fallout Sonora, one actively engages in a kind of cultural dialogue between the United States and Mexico, as players are presented with complex ideas that reflect the themes of imperialism, colonialism, and sociocultural representation through a distinctly Russian cultural lens. Now people are starting to see what I'm kind of getting at here, right? Released in 2013 and translated into English in 2016, Fallout Resurrection is a total conversion mod from the Czech Republic that took 10 years to make. Taking place largely in New Mexico and chronologically placed between the events of Fallout 1 and 2, the game's narrative revolves around the cult of ghouls, Fallout's mutated humanoids, and Resurrection's main conceit is that the ghouls in New Mexico discover a special machine in an abandoned and underground vault that allows them to be transfigured into, quote, normal-looking humans. The trade-off is that if a ghoul is transformed into a healthy human, they suffer from a form of accelerated aging and die after a year or so. The game grapples with questions of discrimination, as ghouls within the universe of Fallout are largely seen as monstrous or less than human. And so Resurrection's Cult of Rebirth seeks to rectify this issue by waging rebellion against humankind in order to establish the rights and freedoms of ghouls. As is tradition in Fallout games, the player is given the choice to rejoin the cult or destroy it. Nonetheless, in pursuing the ending that involves rejoining the cult, the player character, alongside their ghoul compatriots, manages to push back the Brotherhood of Steel and take the city of Albuquerque as their home base of operations. And while I think it's kind of difficult to classify Fallout Resurrection's vision as utopian, it's still recognizable as a significant transcultural negotiation of the social tensions surrounding Czechoslovakia's ultimately peaceful dissolution into the Czech Republic and Slovakia. As such, the game presents a fantastic vision of an American post-apocalyptic conflict marred by racism and discrimination and mediated through a Czech cultural context. The games discussed in this paper presentation are a small sample of the many Fallout mods that have been officially released and are in fact still in development in Eastern Europe. In recent years, classic Fallout mods have also been developed and released in other countries outside the Eastern Bloc, with one of the most notable ones coming from my home country of Canada. The Sum is a total conversion mod developed by Quebecois artist Hugo Nadeau and funded by the Canada Art Council, making it, I think, the first state-funded Fallout mod in the world. Even more significant is the fact that the explicit purpose of the Sum is to explore anarchist cultures and to bring to life an anarchist utopia in the post-apocalyptic wasteland. Epstein Berry's concept of transcultural imaginaries is a useful framework for understanding the unrestricted freedoms that modders possess in their ability to explore themes, narratives, cultures, and mechanics that exist outside the scope of officially sanctioned releases. Indeed, if Epstein and Berry suggest that transculturalism is a process of negotiation towards the realization of diverse cultural freedom, then mods are in many ways the perfect medium to stage such interferences and dialogues. The mods discussed in this paper explicitly use American settings and American cultures for modders and players to negotiate their own utopic reflections over the chaos and corruption that still persists and affects their own particular socio-political contexts. Defeating the imperialistic Brotherhood of Steel in order to establish peace and cultural diversity in the wasteland can be read as a utopian hope for peace and stability in one's own society. And the transcultural negotiation of Eastern and Western cultural ideals regarding what this peace exactly entails remains a constant dialogue that has yet obviously to achieve actualization. Thus, as long as humanity dreams of apocalypse, we will also dream of utopia. Thank you very much.